Afternoon to all the present in this meeting, in this webinar, and particularly I would like to thank Professor Bob Emiliani, who's professor at Central Connecticut State University and also at Brown University, and he will be the main presenter. So thank you very much for this provocative topic for this webinar. We appreciate we appreciate the provocations that you start, and thank you very much.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure.
I would like also to thank Lillian Gilbreth, who's managing partner of Kaizen Institute Western Europe. He is based in Porto. And he was a former colleague because he was when we entered university a long time ago. He made a quick change of professional, and he left university to start working as a professional, and is now a very relevant player in the Kaizen world and in the business world in Portugal. In Europe and in several other countries. So thank you, Euclides, for joining us and for being the main discussant of this presentation. So and I would like to thank also to say hello to all the present in this webinar and all the from the university and from outside the university in particular. So I'll give the word to Bob, so thank you very much, and I'll be listening very carefully to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm happy to be with you to talk about the many opportunities, Kaizen opportunities for improving both teaching and student learning. I just want to emphasize the two things from this opening slide is the connection between academia and industry, but also in the photo you see here, it's a picture of me sitting in the student's chair and understanding things from the student's perspective. And that is a pathway towards understanding what our Kaizen opportunities are. Briefly, my background, the thing I would like to simply emphasize here is that I joined academia after I spent 15 years in industry, where I had management positions in engineering, manufacturing, and supply chain management. I felt, in my case, after completing my doctorate, it was important to enter into industry, where I had a very good time and learned many things, and felt that for me it was necessary to do that, to take that step before going into higher education. So the basic proposition I have here is that we are likely to be average teachers if we teach the way we were taught. And so we have all been students and beginning for the first grade and through high school and college and so forth. And if we enter the teaching profession, there's a great possibility that we will teach the way we were taught, because we will have the assumption that the way we were taught makes sense, that somebody figured out that this was a good way to teach. And so we should continue various traditions with respect to teaching. But one of the things we do with the Kaizen mindset is to ask why, and why are we doing things this way? And if we teach the way we were taught, we are essentially bound to traditions, which means we are not improving. So I want to give you an analogy here briefly. When somebody comes to your house to do some work, such as an electrician, you probably do not like it if they come to your home unprepared, if they show up late, if they're reading a manual to figure out how to fix your problem, if they don't apply their work experience to your problem, if they don't tell you what the problem is, and so on. You don't like that. And similarly, as a student, and we were all students, we didn't like professors who came to class unprepared, or who read from a book, or who failed to add their knowledge or perspective to a topic, did not engage the class in discussion, was late to class, and so on. So of course, an electrician and a professor, these are two different professions. They're not the same, but fundamentally both have a job to do. And the question is, how do they do that job? So some years ago, I did a survey of students in our university. And I asked them some questions about, in their opinion, what they thought were the errors that teachers made in teaching. And you can see here there's many, many errors. We're not going to go through each one. We'll highlight a few with fundamentally the error of cannot teach or goes too fast, ignores student feedback. The assignment work instructions are ambiguous. They explain the topic only one way, not communicating what students are expected to know, out-of-date teaching materials, and finally, standing in the queue outside of the professor's office to get help. So what you see here is something that as a student, I'm sure all of us have experienced because we've had many teachers in our lives throughout our primary and secondary and higher education. So we've seen most likely each one of these things. And then the question is, do we do these things ourselves? And so some of this relates to pride and workmanship. And I believe in university, when it comes to research, there is great pride in the teacher's workmanship. In service, in many university systems, we are required to participate in various committees and contribute to service to the university and to our profession. And I think to some extent, yes, there's pride in workmanship. It depends on the committee, the type of professional engagement and so forth. But in teaching, is there pride in workmanship? In my estimation of the situation, having been in higher education and spoken to many people about this for the last 22 years or so, is that probably not so much pride in workmanship there. Perhaps for some people there is pride in workmanship, but fundamentally there's many, many teaching errors that occur. And if you do a Pareto chart of these teaching errors, again, you see that number one error is cannot teach. And so we have to ask why this is. And in at least the American system of higher education, the assumption is that if one has a terminal degree, such as a PhD or Doctor of Science, that they can teach. And so they enter the university after completing their terminal degree and begin to teach. They may have had some teaching experience as a teaching assistant in graduate school, but they probably were doing things the way the professor did it, and that probably involved a lot of traditional ways of doing things. And so, so you Pareto it out, and you notice here that we don't really see an 80-20 rule. There isn't 20% of these errors that cause 80% of the problem. So that in of itself is a problem. And if we focus on the top 15 teaching errors, you know, that obviously the prior slide is there's many, many things to correct. And so we want to try to focus in on the major problems before we work on the other problems. So this top 5 or 10 or 15 errors would be the place to begin to make the improvements. Related to this is, you know, what is the result of these teaching errors? Many students, at least in the American system that I'm familiar with, when they're done with their undergraduate education, they're not so happy about it. They're glad to be done. And sometimes they say things like, I never want to open up another book again. And that should not be the result of higher education, is to say, I don't want to open up another book again. When you ask students, how many really good, in your opinion, how many really good professors did you have? They typically say 3 out of 4 good professors out of 40 professors that they may have had in their undergraduate education. So then the question is, why are only 10% of professors remembered by students as having been really good? So what could be some of the reasons? Were the other professors really that bad? Were the other professors just merely forgettable because their teaching abilities were average? Could the response that there were only 3 or 4 good professors out of 40 been driven by a bias? Is this comment or is this reflection accurate? to the quality of instruction? Or perhaps there's only 3 or 4 courses that undergraduate students are really interested out of the 40 courses they take, that they really connect with those 3 or 4 courses, that the subject, there's a confluence of the subject matter and the professor that make it a really good course and a really good professor. So what is the root cause? So if you do the standard fishbone diagram, you have something that looks like this. I just should say that many of these slides contain a lot of detail, and you can look at this later because it's being recorded, and you can pause the video and examine the detail of this and other slides later, as well as the presentation can be made available to you. But the thing to see here is that there are many areas to examine for improvement. It's a dynamic and full, there's many things going on here, so there's much to look at. Another thing that I asked my students was 2 questions related to assessment, how to assess student learning and how to improve student learning outcomes. I said to them, what are 3 modes of learning assessment that are most beneficial to you personally to help you learn the most in a course? And then I asked, what 3 modes of learning assessment do you hate the most? So, and the answer is, on the left-hand side here, the bottom 3 are pop quizzes, team projects, and in-class tests. The pop quizzes, they're obviously, unprepared for. The team project, they don't like because of the free rider problem. Some people on the team do work and others do not. And then the in-class test for most people is very stressful. And so, and that is what we push onto students. That's tradition. We push these methods that we were exposed to as students onto students when we become teachers. So why do we do that? Well, it's by tradition. We just don't give it much thought. We assume that somebody else figured out that these would be good ways of doing assessment. We survived these things. Some didn't, some students didn't, but we apparently did. And so when you ask them what are the 3 that result in the most learning, they say small weekly assignments. So in relation to Kaizen, one of the things we talk about is a tack time or a rate of doing things, a steady pace of doing things like a metronome. So small weekly assignments, practical problem solving. So the material connects to something practical that students can comprehend, and individual projects. And these are the preferences of students. So the question is, why push these assessment methods on the left-hand side, things shown in red in the bar chart, onto students? Now, as faculty, you have to look at this kind of chart and make some determinations of what do you do and how you can make improvements based upon this kind of information. I refer to this, the pushing of these types of assessment methods and the making of the teaching errors as a cycle of unintended abuse, where the professors make basic teaching mistakes, the students get annoyed and behave in a passive-aggressive fashion. The professor and the students, for one reason or another, feel like either this mistakes don't exist or there's nothing they can do about the mistakes. And the professor and the students move on. The students finish the course, they move on to other courses, they graduate. Professor moves on, figures it to be anomalous feedback and just kind of ignores it. So what we obviously have here is good people trapped in bad processes, both professors and students, good people trapped in bad processes. The challenge we should set for ourselves is, why not 90% of teachers are good and 10% are average or bad? I mean, that should be the goal. It should be flipped around. But to flip it around and to strive towards that goal of 90% or 95 or 99 or 100%, we first have to understand the problems in detail. And it does not rest entirely on the shoulders of the professor, as you will see. So here is one of the charts that, of course, you can look at the detail later. There'll be a few of these coming up. But I asked students, what is good quality teaching? Identify one to three things your best teachers did that resulted in good quality teaching, that resulted in their perception of the teacher doing or practicing good quality teaching. And it's summarized in these categories of attitude, teaching itself, delivery, assessment, and follow-up. And so there's many items in these categories. And so we can conclude at a macro level that the quality of teaching is low in all areas. Now, all areas, attitude, teaching, delivery, and so on, and in all categories. Now, please understand that these questions were not directed at any particular professor. It was just in aggregate, in their experience as students, what to them constitutes good quality teaching. And of course, they have a lot of experience. These students, for this particular questions, were undergraduates at the sophomore or junior level, second or third year level. And so they have, of course, all their primary and middle school and so on into higher education. So they have some credibility to make this kind of assessment. I asked undergraduate students, what do you value in a degree program? And what do you value in a course? And so there's things listed here for the degree program, the course in a general sense, specifically the assignments, and then specifically the professor. And again, the obvious thing, if you go through the detail, and you'll recognize all of this stuff as being very real, very practical. There's nothing wild and crazy here. This is just a basic function of student-teacher interaction that occurs. And part of what is involved in a degree program, of course, involves administration, because there's approval processes for courses and degree programs and things like that. But the conclusion is that the value of academic programs and courses must be improved. And in the US, this is particularly a problem. I think the UK as well. I don't know about Portugal, but the price greatly has grown in the years. The price for paying for a university increases greatly over the last 30 years, and the price is greater than the value that's being offered. So there's a large gap between price and value. So again, what you see in these charts are hundreds of Kaizen opportunities. And these are the opportunities that are simply immediately apparent. These are the opportunities that we would say are laying in front of us, or just on the floor in front of us. We don't have to dig to find these things. They're just laying here on the surface. I asked graduate students, what do you value in a degree program, and what do you value in a course? And similar situation. They have more experience. They have a little bit different perspective. They have work experience. Most of these graduate students that we teach, and so they have a different perspective compared to the undergraduates on these items. And then finally asked the students, what characteristics indicate to you that a university is high quality? What are your major displeasures with respect to teaching? What are your major displeasures with respect to administration? And what do you desire most from your higher education experience? And overall, if you look at the detail, again here, there'll be nothing here that surprises you. You know these things to be true. You know these things exist. Suggests that the entire student experience must be improved. And as I've shared this information with other academics and university administrators over the years, when they look at the detail that's contained in those charts, the same situation seems to exist everywhere around the world. So I've developed some no's for teaching, and in the world of Kaizen, we often talk about no's or must nots, which means things you must not do with respect to an activity, or with respect to improving something improving a process. And so here are some of my no's for teaching: no being unprepared, no batching of information, no going too fast, no going too slow, no delays, no ignoring students, etc. You can read this at your leisure. But some of these things you might find controversial, such as it says no complex grading, because many professors have very complex grading system. It's like, what for? Why? Why is that necessary? You see here, no midterm, no final exam, no term paper. You might find some of these things very controversial, but the point of it is what could you do instead that would result in a better learning outcome? You saw in a previous slide that in-class exams and so forth cause problems with stress for students. Why should we be putting students in a situation to struggle in that particular way? So we have to ask ourselves these kinds of questions. Teaching should be free of errors. And people in industry know that in their business of producing their product or service, that when it has many errors, this creates many problems. So likewise, in the processes of teaching and administration, because these things intersect, teaching should be free of errors. It should connect somehow to the student's world. Too often, we teach from our own perspective, the professor's world perspective. But to engage students, we have to understand their world. We should create interest in the subject matter, try to make the course memorable in a positive way, not memorable in the kind of way that I remember when I was walking out of the classroom after the last day of class. Some students, colleagues of mine would say, that was a terrible course. I hated that professor. I didn't learn anything. I mean, these are some of the comments that come out as students file out of the classroom. Courses and teaching should be continuously improved. This should be seen as an ongoing experiment. And to the extent possible, it should be made something that's useful, obviously, in work, but hopefully in life as well, because there's connections to that. So the professor's challenge is to understand or recognize the gap between plan and actual. And in my teaching, every time I teach, I have a plan. We're teaching online because of COVID, but whether it's online or face-to-face, I have a plan of what I want to do. There's an actual delivery of the class that day. There's always a gap between plan and actual. Always. I've never not had a gap between plan and actual. But I recognize these gaps and then I make corrections. I ask, why do I have this gap? What did I miss in my preparation? What did I miss? What did I fail to do in the the assignment instructions and so on? And then I improve it. And over time, the courses become stable in terms of not having errors. They are continuously improved, with new material and so forth. But in terms of errors and abnormal conditions, they become improved and stable. If we ignore these gaps, then we just have the same kinds of problems recurring over and over again in our courses, and it becomes very frustrating for the professor as well as for the students. So the professor's challenge is to accept that these errors exist, and that's difficult for some professors. They do not believe those errors exist. But if you read the charts that I've provided, and if you're honest with yourself, you will see those errors. They must also accept the need to improve and to question tradition, be willing to apply lean principles and practices, to think of these errors as opportunities for Kaizen and improvement, learn by doing, more of a trial and error approach to teaching, and also accept the fact that one is never done improving. And as a result of accepting those things and understanding those things, you engage in Kaizen to improve teaching. Kaizen should be the method that we embrace for that. So I have what they call the teaching house here, which the goals of teaching are less confusion, efficient learning, higher quality, greater student retention. Content is focused, create a learning system where there's pull for the learning, pull for the information, create information supermarkets that students can draw from. The assignments are focused, level load the assignments week by week, use standard assignment formats, apply Kaizen for creativity and innovation, and for personalized discovery and learning, both for the student and for the faculty. I've written some papers on this topic if you're interested, and this is not a new subject, you know. So let me explain on the right-hand side. Some of you may be familiar with Lillian Gilbreth. She was a famous industrial engineer known worldwide in the early 1900s. She passed away, I believe it was in 1972. She was 90 or so years old. But she was a famous industrial engineer and industrial psychologist, and her doctoral dissertation at Brown University was eliminating waste in teaching. So she was examining this in 1915, looking at ways of eliminating waste in teaching in 1915. And I got permission from her grandchildren to publish her doctoral dissertation. It appears in this book called Eliminating Waste in Teaching. I myself has written a book called Lean Teaching that describes my approach of Kaizen, of improvement, to become a better teacher and better student learning outcomes. And then a paper from 2005, I believe, yes, called Using Kaizen to Improve. At that time, I was teaching in a business school to improve graduate degree programs. But what one learns there applies simply to any type of teaching in any type of school. So that concludes the presentation. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Bob. It was very, very interesting. Now I'll ask Euclides to introduce himself better and to perhaps explain what Kaizen is for the ones who are attending and don't know, and to ask the first questions. So thank you very much. And Euclides, it's yours.
Okay. Thank you, João, and thank you, Bob. Very interesting. Kaizen, as most of the people know, means change for the better. Kaizen is change, Zen is for the better. And of course, this was a name that started, a concept that started being used in Toyota after the Second World War. And then it was renamed by the Americans as a lean system. Lean is more the result of changing for the better. So you get lean, you get more efficient, more, let's say, better in a certain way. So I was a student, of course, and I also was a professor. Unfortunately, it was only 2 years. I was an assistant professor in this same university. And then I moved to consulting. And in between, I worked in Texas Instruments, that is an American company. But most of my career is in consulting, teaching Kaizen and teaching Lean to many types and companies and organizations, but not many schools, I must say. In fact, I can say I've never applied Kaizen in a school or in a teaching environment. But the first question, Bob, is, this presentation, the point of view was the point of view of the student as a customer, right? Because we did a voice of customers, so we evaluated the voice of the student, and we see that they are not pleased with many things, they are motivated by other things, and they have different needs. And of course, when they finish, they say, oh, this course was good, that course was bad, that professor was good, that professor was bad. So they have their own voice of customer evaluation. But many people think that the student is also raw material. What is your point of view between these 2 points of view, you know? And how can the professor deal with this?
Well, I would say that the student is raw material, but so are professors. We are raw material. I mean, we should always be thinking about learning and improving more. And professionally, when it comes to our discipline of engineering, whatever, We are a student because we continue to learn and write and so on, but we should also continue to be a raw material and student for learning how to teach better. Students as customers is a controversial topic. Many professors do not like to think of students as customers. They view it as something the way administrators view students, and the introduction of what's called managerialism, concepts from industry coming into higher education and then diluting the the very valuable mission of higher education by thinking of students as customers. But I have shown you many problems, hundreds of problems related to teaching and administration and so on. And that if you keep going like that, then do you really have a university? Are students going to come there? In the United States, students are looking for alternatives to university, different types of credentialing that are now coming from corporations like Google and SAP. And Google has a new program out there where they will consider it equivalent to an undergraduate degree in, I forgot, something computer science or whatever. And so we have to take these types of problems seriously. Is the student a customer? Well, I have no problem of thinking of students as customers or raw materials. This is a point of argument that to me makes no sense. But to some people, it's very important that students are not customers. So the solution is actually very simple, and I'll use an analogy. In mathematics, some of you may remember, you're engineers, you know about imaginary numbers. And imaginary numbers were some crazy idea three or 400 years ago. But this creation of imaginary numbers, once it was devised, now allowed certain types of problems to be solved that could not be solved using real numbers. So this crazy idea of imaginary numbers end up to be very beneficial because now you could solve certain problems you couldn't solve any other way. So we can use it as analogous thinking here and say, consider students as imaginary customers. And if that's what it takes, because you see the problems, they exist, just consider them imaginary customers and use that construct to solve problems that cannot otherwise be solved by thinking of students as customers. I mean, we really have to get over some of these barriers. It becomes a point of being just it's just holding back improvement. Again, go look at these errors and mistakes and problems, and you'll see that they are entirely real, every last one of them. If you're interested, you can go to my personal website and search the term imaginary numbers or imaginary customers, and you will find a blog post that fully explains the concept and where it came from, imaginary numbers, and how it is applied to improving teaching.
Thank you, Bob. It's a good analogy. Another thing is, when I was a professor, I was concerned with the measurement system. My managers, I can call this, let's say the senior professors, or even the directors at the university, they were measuring my performance in a certain way. And it was mostly related to research. Mm-hmm. It was not related to teaching. What is your point of view about that?
That's right. I mean, teaching is assumed, it's ridiculous. Teaching is assumed to be good because one has an advanced degree. It's just, it's crazy. Sometimes it's hard to just believe this is even happening. Whenever I show this survey data about problems with teaching, the Pareto charts and the other Excel charts and so forth, whenever I show that to university leaders and faculty, so that I've shown this for maybe 5 years now to different universities and leaders and faculty, to the best of my knowledge, it's ignored because the focus is on research, and it's just ignored. The university gets criticized by industry for not, this phrase, walking the talk, not demonstrating their rhetoric, about learning and improving. They're not applying these same concepts to the university, and the faculty are not applying these same concepts to themselves. So they're going to fall behind. So the reward system is not properly balanced in at least the higher education system that I'm familiar with in America, and maybe the same in Portugal as well. These traditions university president. Don't be afraid to do that. But they are very afraid. They're afraid that it will somehow be negative against them. If you think there's opportunity for improvement, tell the president of the university, tell the provost, tell the dean. But they don't do that. There needs to be some measures here that are taken seriously with respect to teaching. There are standard measures of student learning, surveys, and so forth. The quality of the course, the effectiveness in the instructor. These can work well. I think that they should be examined and hopefully simplified, designed in such a way so that there's just a few accurate KPIs and metrics. But we should also observe, are we seeing, students happy faces from the things that they're learning and doing well in school because the instruction and the assessments in particular work to students' strengths. I have experimented in my courses, by the way, with letting students select the assessment method. I give them a menu for the assessment. I'll give you, if you want a test in class, I'll do that for three students. If you want to do a term paper, 6 students, okay, we'll do, not a paper, we'll do that. If you want some other type of assessment, a team project, the 5 of you students, I'll do that. Why not? This is the type of, there needs to be some innovative thinking and creativity applied to this. I think university has a hard time, at least in America, moving forward if you're not in the top tier, because these things go unaddressed.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking about, let's assume we have improved a lot the quality of teaching. Let's assume the professors are being measured in the right way, not only for research, but also for teaching. What would be the advantage or the benefit that the school can have with this type of improvement?
Well, I think when a key indicator is when we ask people, would you recommend this university to other students? Or would you recommend this program in engineering or business to other students? And we experience this when we buy a product or service. They say, would you recommend this to somebody else? And I think when we fill out these surveys, we're very honest and say no, or maybe, or definitely yes, we would. And so this is part of the thing. I mean, the university, at least in America, now talks more about enrollment of students like sales, that we have to have, higher enrollment, basically higher sales. That's what they're saying. And so if you want higher sales, you have to produce a good product, right? You have to make a good service. And so otherwise, the enrollment goes down, sales go down. We know what happens in companies, in the private enterprise world, when sales go down. Bad things happen, there's layoffs and the plant closes and people are, suppliers get squeezed for lower prices. This is the same thing happening in university. This is completely avoidable outcomes.
Yeah, but Bob, there is another thing that in Portugal and probably everywhere, some universities, they have a very good reputation. Like, for example, the University of Porto School of Engineering. So there are the private schools and the public schools. And here in Portugal, the public schools really have a high reputation. So The students get a job easily.
Mhm.
The brand name is very well accepted in the market. So there is no real incentive for improving the teaching because there is no need. And also, they don't need our best universities with a big reputation. They don't need to sell more because they fulfill all the places because they are the first choice of the students, even with bad or improve teaching that could be improved. So it's not easy. It's a system problem, you know.
Well, it is a system problem, but it's also not a forever thing that the reputation is good. This thing goes away over time. You know, if you don't work to maintain it. There is no, you know, University of Bologna is the oldest university in the world. I think it was started in 1132. It has no birthright to exist. You know, I mean, it can go away just like anything else due to mismanagement and complacency and so forth. It just may take longer, but it's subject to the same types of things. And if the people who are responsible for this organization of universities, which is the faculty and administrators and staff, if they're complacent and just ignore these kinds of problems, then yeah, you can continue with a good reputation for some period of time, but eventually there'll be other competition in the marketplace. And this is something that universities didn't deal with in the past. Maybe in Portugal it's not a problem, but in the US, higher education became commoditized. Once the price so far exceeded the value, then people start to shop around for a better deal in higher education. And that's when the reputation no longer holds, except if you're, you know, Harvard or Yale, you know, in America, these the so-called Ivy League schools. But you know, even then, that's not a forever thing too.
Yeah, I was thinking
I might just add one more thing though. I recognize these problems, so I address them in my teaching. I mean, I would feel, to me, like somebody who's not doing a good job if I don't recognize and make these corrections for these abnormal conditions. I have nobody pushing me to do this in the university. I do it myself to do a good job and to do what I think the students expect and what they want, so that they have a better learning outcomes.
Yeah, and it's in the benefit of the student, and it's in the benefit of the society and the companies where they will go for work. So considering this, maybe the measurement system should look more into that, you know, what is the impact on society, on the service? To measure this, as you said, research is one target, teaching is another target, but also service to society could be another target, or it could be a target to be improved.
Correct. And you could have something similar, like, you know, there is for automobiles, there is a quality measurement of something like how many defects after 5 years, you know? You could reverse that for higher education. Say, well, in your curriculum or in these specific courses, 5 years later, what do you remember? Because this is always a big problem in higher education. You go through all of these courses, and 5 or 10 years later, you say, well, I only remember 3 things. How can you go through 40 courses and remember 3 things? So that's fundamentally says that a lot of the education is not retained. So the learning outcome may be good for the purpose of an assessment, but what happens 1 year later, 5 years later, 10 years later? The quality would be high if students can remember a lot from certain core courses 5 or 10 years later.
Yeah, and there is also the waste of resources, you know, because if a student has to repeat for a certain number of years, he is using the resources that should be dedicated to other new students. And so is in a certain way we are wasting lots of resources.
Yeah, I mean, there's a quote from AG Toyota that says, if we don't use employees' time effectively, we are wasting their lives. So that applies to professors. If the the system of university doesn't use our time effectively, we're wasting our lives. But it's also for the student. If we don't use their time effectively in the course and in the program, then we are wasting their lives too. And they know that. They're sensitive to it.
Yeah. And of course, in the world of the businesses nowadays, we have many top management interested in changing the system, because in many companies they also have paradigms, they also have tradition. If they keep doing the same thing, they will get the same results, like Einstein would say. And so they decide at the top management level to change the system. And my question is, do you know any school implementing a continuous improvement system or changing the continuous improvement system, let's say implementing Kaizen as a system and on a continual basis?
I don't specifically keep track of that. There is something called Lean Higher Education. The website is leanhe.org. So Lean Higher Education, leanhe.org. And they have universities who are members of that organization and are engaged in Kaizen and other continuous improvement activities. To the best of my knowledge, they're all focused on improving administrative processes. There's little or nothing in the way of Kaizen applied to teaching, which to me is very surprising, because this is 16 or 17 years after I reported work on this in that paper you saw earlier on using Kaizen to improve business school courses and programs. But they had a conference recently, leanhe.org, October 2021. And I gave a presentation. It's videotaped there. There's many others. There's maybe 150 presentations available on their website for viewing. So if you were to go to the Global Festival link and click on that, you can access the physical copy of the presentation, as well as if it was a video, that as well. And you can see what the different universities are doing. There's many universities that are active in some types of continuous improvement, but again, it's almost entirely for administrative processes, which says that the administration doesn't want to perturb the faculty. They do not want to poke at the faculty to say, hey, you need to think about your job differently. You need to escape from some of these traditions. You need to be more innovative and creative because we have these problems. But they are unwilling to confront the faculty. And to me, this is a great weakness in administration, because the facts that I've shown you are the facts. And the universities that are struggling now are all following the same path of industry. They're going to merge. They're going to cut out some departments. They're going to lay some people off, faculty and staff. They're going to downsize. They're going to squeeze their suppliers on price. There's no innovation, no creativity in doing that. And university people, faculty criticize managerialism, but that's exactly what's happening as a result of not improving.
Well, it's very challenging what you're both saying, and I'm taking notes. And we have to open now the discussion to the audience. And I have a question, or I had a question from Arminda Alves. Please, okay. Arminda.
So, many thanks for your nice conversation for both of you, and your excellent presentation. And it is indeed a thematic that interests all of us. I'd like to ask you if you can share some of your experience during now the new way of teaching with distance learning due to pandemics. Have you got any experience? How does Kaizen moves to that? This is the first question. Yeah. If you allow me, just only to correct something, or to share also some impression about the motivation of teachers in public school for doing better and for improving always. I think that I am a teacher for more than 30 years, full professor, and I love teaching. So this is the first motivation to do and to improve and to learn, just we are doing today from you the information. So in public or industry, public school, private school, people I think that should be aware that to maintain the reputation and the high quality, we should also learn and do our best. And I think that some of our teachers are doing this. So just a small correction for young teachers. Their motivation is also the assignment, because their evaluation and progression in career is doing regarding the teaching. So sorry for that. And distance learning, I don't know, what is your experience?
Well, let me answer this or comment on the second item first about loving teaching. So this may be not to upset anybody, but a different way of looking at things. If we love something, we probably are not very motivated to change it. If we dislike something, we might be motivated to change it. So the form of dislike would be this gap between plan and actual. I go into the class to teach the course this way. There are problems in how I taught it, or there's problems in the assignment. I keep having all these problems. I hate teaching. Maybe I need to improve. So it's giving you a little bit of an opposite way of looking at things. To be dissatisfied, perpetually dissatisfied with teaching, is the big motivator to improve. And so I don't say I hate teaching, but I will say I'm perpetually dissatisfied with my teaching. Even though students, one thing I did not show were my metrics, which when I started with applying Kaizen to teaching were a 1-point improvement. So I was teaching at the American average of 3.8 out of score of 5. And when the first 1 or 2 semesters that I applied Kaizen to teaching, I was at 4.8. You know, I mean, it was that big a difference. And then what has happened over time, it's very steady at 4.6, 4.7, 4.8 out of 5. And the variance is very small. And so this is what drives improvement. And Euclides can talk eloquently and extensively about this, of how dissatisfaction drives improvement. And yes, we switched to online teaching. However, I had been teaching online for 5 years prior to COVID. And so yeah, there is a difference. You have to switch over and do things differently and think about things differently. And so a lot of those types of problems that would come up, I had previously worked out. So this was not such a big transition for me with COVID. But one thing I think that is different is I make myself available essentially anytime to students, you know, with individual students, a group of students, if they want to Zoom, anytime, it doesn't matter. I'm available. I make myself available. So it's not just the Zoom class, you know, but it's, you want a phone call, you want email, you want Zoom, doesn't matter what you want. Let's talk about it. You got a question. I have students sometimes say, I have a question. Can we talk next week? I said, what next week? Call me now. I'm at work. Which means I'm at home in front of my computer like I am now. I'm at work. Call me now. Right now. I don't want you to wait a week to get this question answered. Let's do it now, right? Euclides, again, can speak eloquently about now. Do it now. Take care of it now, not next week. When I have a problem, I would teach many graduate students in the evening. Class would be over at 9 o'clock at night. I have a gap between plan and actual. I go home that night, make the correction at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. I don't say, let me just collect all these problems and make a big list and make improvement 3 months from now. I correct it right away. So, you know, it's this attitude of dissatisfaction with the status quo, dissatisfaction, being very annoyed that these students have questions. Why are students waiting in line outside a professor's office? What happened in the instruction that caused students to wait in line? That's no good. So to us, it's me and Euclides, this is abnormalities. These things should not be happening.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if I answered your question completely about the online, but
that would be a good conversation for hours. Okay, thank you.
okay.
Okay, we're listening to someone who wants to have a question. Marta, do you have any questions from the audience?
No question in YouTube.
Okay, so I'll ask a question regarding a very specific subject. You mentioned that students didn't like group work, but they liked, or it would be better to have individual assignments. But if we are on a project-based learning environment, we need people with different competencies to do the tasks or to be specific for such tasks. So we need people also to learn how to work in groups. How can you do both things, or how can you solve this problem?
Yeah. So there's two things going on these days in before university education. There is lots of group project work. So it's not like undergraduate students have no experience with group project work. They get this in high school, junior high, and so forth. So they're not unfamiliar with working in groups. So when they come to university, question is, how much more of that do they need? And I think it is important to be much more careful to figure out where the project is better to be individual versus where the project is better to be group. So I don't say you stop doing group projects in university. I say you have to be more, people have to be more careful to determine where group project is important and where individual project would be better to do. And then to observe the outcomes, because these things change in time. You know, over time, it may make sense to do many more individual projects and group projects, and then time changes and things change, and it goes back to more group projects than individual projects. But everybody, so I'll give you another example, writing assignments. Every professor thinks it's important for students to have writing assignments. So every professor gives writing assignments. Does every professor have to give writing assignments if every other professor is giving writing assignments? No. No, you don't have to. Some professor can do something different. Like, I want to teach students how to write short, concise, like in industry. Let's teach students how to do a business communication of a technical topic. Or not, or do something different, you know?
Very well, very well. I agree. I agree with you completely. And I'm waiting for more questions. If there are no more questions, I have another one.
Sure.
I also agree that we could experiment with the Kaizen program, although we are limited because we are a public university. So we have to be following some procedures which we are obliged to do. So we cannot innovate in some areas. We have to be following some rules. But what if you are faced with a situation where you have, let's say, 100 students that depend on one course to finish their degree, and the professor has the absolute almost decision on if he passes or fails the students?
Can you repeat the question?
Suppose, I'll simplify it. Suppose you have 20 students that failed a course once, twice, 3 times, and the professor or the group of professors that teaches that course thinks that they are not able to go ahead because they failed in their course.
Well, there is always a way to teach something better. So this pen, if I take it apart into its component pieces and I establish, 5 teams and give each of the teams of 5 people pieces to pen, to each of a pen, they'll come up with 5 different processes for assembling that pen. So there's innumerable processes, innumerable ways to teach a topic where you don't have this outcome of students failing and failing and failing. The reason why they're failing and failing and failing is there's no change in the teaching methodology. So we learned something in Kaizen to experiment and all the time with new methodologies for doing things and finding a better way, looking at ideas, experimenting with ideas, even if they seem crazy. So, that's the kind of thing you do. Now, in America, the professor has a lot of freedom to experiment. We do. It's very true. In America, we have a lot of freedom. In Europe, generally, there is more control over what the professor does and how they do it and so on. At least this is what I'm told by, for example, my colleagues in the UK. But I am a big believer in doing a Kaizen underground, underground Kaizen. Make improvements. They're small improvements. You don't have to tell everybody. These aren't things that should need approval and so on. The bureaucracy can stifle, reduce innovation. And in the meantime, the world is changing, and maybe some of your engineering programs become decline in enrollment because Google or some type of a big industrial company offers a similar education of the core material in half the time. And that's what's happening.
Okay, thank you very much. We are running out of time, and I appreciate very much your webinar, and Euclid's questions. I think I'll ask the audience to give a big applause to our guests, and if you have a question and you have not been able to ask it or were not able to ask it, you can send it to me and I will forward it to our guests, and I'm sure they will try to answer it if the question is reasonable, of course. And,
even if it's unreasonable.
So thank you very much. And thank you also for the support, technical support for this event, and also to my colleague, Anna Camanho, which I not referred in the start, and has helped us to establish these webinars.
Thank you, João, and Euclides and Martin.
I hope you will be able to visit us one time when this situation changes for the better.
Or I'd like to, thank you.
And I wouldn't mind to visit you and learn more. And thank you very much. It was very instructive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Please. Thank you.